Hello and welcome to the Sallen Coefficient, in which I, Joe Sallen, take a look at some of the big or new games that are out there and tell you whether or not they're going to be worth your gaming time based on a metric that includes the depth and length of a game and sort of balances them to tell you whether or not it's worth investing your effort, money, and especially your time into. Today's review is going to be about the Voyages of Marco Polo, or as you can see in my German version, Auf den Spuren von Marco Polo. So it's a language independent game, so all of my pieces are going to look the same as anything that you would buy if you got the English version. And the only thing is that I've got like some printouts for the rules and the player aids and stuff. So this game is a dice placement game that has come out from the design team behind Tzolk and the more recent releases of Lorenzo and Magnifico and Grand Austria Hotel. Just a really big recent design team that's really hitting big. And Auf den Spuren von Marco Polo, the Voyages of Marco Polo, is one of their biggest games to date. So I'm going to tell you what I think about it. But before I do any of that, I'm going to walk you through how to play the game. And we'll go ahead and kick that off here. A really quick thank you to my sponsor, Game Surplus, gamesurplus.com. They help me to make these videos, bring them to you. So if you like my videos, go sponsor them. Also, please, in the wake of the recent hurricanes that have happened here recently, and even if you're in the future watching this, please get on there and donate something to the Red Cross or just some sort of disaster, okay? I don't ask for any money from my viewers, but I would like for there to be a general spending of money towards goodwill things. So anyway, don't give me money, give it to the money other people in need. Let's talk about Marco Polo. All right, hello. In Marco Polo, you are going to be traveling around a map of Eurasia, starting in Venice, up here in the corner of the map, and you're going to be spending your dice every turn to move about the map, and you'll be getting points based on whether or not you're able to fulfill your destination tickets that you choose at the beginning of the game, as well as contracts that give you points, and then there's other ways that you can obtain points throughout the game. It's kind of a point salad of sorts where things are going to give you points. You're going to be converting things into points. There are certain goals for you to hit that give you points, but it's really up to you what you're going to do to most efficiently score and make points in the game. All right, so the first thing that's very important, setup in this game is a very big part of the gameplay. You are making decisions right from the start, and so the first thing that you're going to be deciding after you've randomly determined player order is which of the available personalities you're going to be choosing. There is 8 of them included in the base game, and there's a small expansion that adds a few more things. I'm not really going to talk about that in this video, and there's supposed to be something upcoming, at least in the present time that I'm recording this video, but let's talk just about what's here. There are 8 different possible personalities for you to choose from. These are player powers. These are what are going to give you what feels like amazing capabilities that differentiate what you are good at achieving throughout the game or what you are sort of predisposed to do. Anyway, there are lots of different things. One of the most interesting ones, and one of the ones that a friend of mine who knows that I have a difficulty with randomness in games tried to sell me on the game, was that there's one of these whose special ability is it's a dice game and he never rolls dice. How does it work? Well, let me tell you about the rest of the game. And anyway, the first thing you're going to be doing is choosing a player power. Now, your player power, once you have it, you're now going to be given 4 destination cards. You're going to choose 2 of these. These are destinations that you're going to get points for visiting in the game. So the more ambitious you get, the more points you could possibly get. If you visit the same location for 2 different cards, you're going to score less points in general. However, you really want to be able to complete these if possible by the end of the game because it's a really nice source of points. So you're going to be choosing essentially 2 destination tickets, and you will never get any more of these in the game. These are your destination tickets for the entire game. You're going to discard the other 2. So once you're all set up, you're going to either be starting in Venice or with one of the personalities that I just happened to choose for this game, you're going to be starting over here in Beijing. So if you start in Beijing, the person that starts there immediately gets to place down one of their trading posts, as most players will be doing as they move about the board. Wherever you end your movement in general, you are going to place down a trading post. kind of the goal of the game is to get to Beijing because the first person there gets 10 points. Well, the first person's already there, so he gets 10 points. It also allows you at the end of the game to score points for all the resources that you have that you weren't able to turn into things. But that's not a very great way to score points. Anyway, let's talk more about what you're actually going to be doing now that we've got the game set up. You have a certain amount of coins, you have a certain amount of camels, and every player has dice. Most players, obviously not the one that I said that doesn't roll dice, will be rolling dice at the start of every round and then counting up those dice. If they have less than 15, they'll get to collect one of the two main forms of income in the game, which is camels and coins, equal to the difference between how much they rolled and 15. So once a player rolls, every player determines what they're going to get in terms of what they call compensation there for rolling low. And you're also going to get bonuses during this phase. Some of these rolls will give you a bonus. None of the ones I've chosen give a bonus, but some of them give you a bonus like a certain amount of money, camel, an unfulfilled contract. Every player starts with a starting contract, which tends to be really, really good, like in terms of that gives you quite a bit of points and is a fairly good like economic one that it gives you a pretty good turnaround. You might not get tons of points, but you do get really good things if you're able to complete it. And they tend to be kind of small, so it just gives players something to start with. And once you've collected the income that you might get from your character and will later on be getting from these different spots on the board that are for income, you now are ready to start with the first player, whoever has this little hourglass thing. And in subsequent rounds, the first player is determined by whoever was the last person to travel. And you will be taking your dice and placing a group. A group could be as small as 1 die or as large as 3 dice. So you're really choosing how you're going to allocate your dice here. There are 2 different main areas to the board, or 2 different main sort of actions. You've got the movement action, and then you've got the acquisition of resources and contracts. Now, contracts are kind of dependent on what resources you're able to get, but movement is kind of its own separate thing and requires tons and tons of money. Anyway, once you've decided what you're going to do, you're going to place your die or dice on an action. You're going to take that action most of the time at the strength of the value of the die that you placed. If I place a 4 in the contract area, I'm able to choose any 2 contracts from the 4 or lower. If I were to have placed a 6, I'd be able to choose any of the contracts, and if I choose one of the first 2 contracts, I actually get a bonus of income with it. There are some spots on the board that the number that you played doesn't actually matter. Like this spot right down here is a spot where every single die is going to be, the die value is irrelevant. You're always going to get 2 camels and any good of your choice. So that's kind of nice to be able to use any dice that are too low for you to do anything with otherwise. Big thing though, once you've gone to a spot, that spot is blocked, but that doesn't mean other players can't go there. That just means that other players have to pay money equal to however much they are spending, however the value of the dice. Like if I had a 6 and I wanted to go to a spot that was already blocked, let's say that I wanted to go get camels from the market. If I want to go there with a 6, it's going to cost me $6. Placing on top of here, $6. I have to pay $1 for every pip on the die. Now, you might be thinking, well, if you're using a group of dice, how much do you actually determine is getting spent? That's the lowest die. So if I'm using a 6 and a 1, I'm only activating it for a 1. So it can be a really weak activation that way. One thing, though, that the 1s are nice for is this spot over here where you get money. You have to pay money to go there if other people have gone there. But if I go there with a 1, I'm only spending 1 and I get 5, which is nice. There are free actions in the game. Free actions in the game do not consume your turn, but they usually consume some sort of resource. For example, this spot is a free action that gives you $3. You get to do that before you actually take your turn or afterwards. It's up to you. Most of the time you wouldn't want to do it afterwards. It'd be kind of silly. You'd do it before. All right. The other thing that you can do as a free action is you can spend 3 of your camels in your supply to take a black die. There's only a certain amount available depending on the number of players. You're going to immediately roll it, and it goes into your available stuff. You can only do that once per turn unless you have the ability to get a black die from an actual contract. So the black dice are going to be something that players sort of wrestle over, but not every time do you necessarily want the extra dice. Sometimes you just want the extra income you could get or the extra camels. Like 3 camels can be very useful, and sometimes a die isn't exactly what you need. So you got to make decisions about that. Generally, though, I like going for the dice. There is one spot on the board that costs all 3, well, not all 3, but 3 of your dice. And that is this spot right here, which gives you gold. It only costs you 2 dice to go get silk. It costs you only 1 to go get spice, and only 1 also to go get camels. Now, when you start the game, pretty much that's all you have available to you, is all at the bottom of the board. But as you move around, you're going to be moving and then getting bonuses if you're the first person to travel to a city, and then placing down your trading post. Now that you have a trading post in this area, you're able to take an action that is only 1 use. You can't actually go there if somebody else goes there. So if the blue person is gone here, yellow, even if yellow gets here, is not going to be able to use that this round. Every die clears and goes back to the owners at the end of the round, but these are one-time use, one-time and blocked. And they are actually taken from a stack. There's 9 different cards that are dealt out on the board every round. They go on the map, and that is taken from a stack of 31 total cards. So they do tend to be very similar in structure for some of them. Like one of them is you get $2 per dice pip, and the other one is you get $2 per dice pip, but you can only get that if you have at least as much trading post laid as the amount of dice. So I mean, some of them are just objectively better or easier or more convenient to get off than others. But though the differences aren't exactly vast, the fact that there's some that are conversions, some that are economy, some that are points, some that are, well, that's the main things that you'll do. Some of them will be dependent on which bonuses you've already been able to come and get for yourself. These income bonuses are things that once you go there, you now get them during the income, like I said, at the start of every round. Some will be dependent on you getting that. But anyway, these actions that are out are really going to influence what is the best route for you to take, as well as considering what cards you have in your hand. And also, you're going to be just needing to choose like what you're going to be doing to score points. There's a lot of times when you're moving on the board, though, that you're going to have to pay extra because there's like when you're traveling through the mountains, it costs you lots of camels. So this middle route through the map, which I apologize that it's far away, but just imagine there's a middle route through the map that really cuts right through the Himalayas and costs lots of camels. The bottom area costs a ton of money because you're having to pay money to travel across the sea. And new players are going to be incredibly surprised at how difficult it is for you to travel around. Traveling in this game is very intentional, deliberate, and it's going to really influence every decision that you make from here on out, because you're either going to be getting income from a spot you want to, or you're going to be getting access to an action. And many times, if that isn't something that you need, you're going to have to make up for it somewhere else in the economy. Players will continue to do this until all players have placed their die for the round. Once that is done, all the contracts clear, a new stack of contracts comes up, and there's specifically 4 sets of contracts because you're going to play this game over 5 rounds. At the end of 5 rounds, you're going to evaluate all the end game scoring conditions, add that together with any points that you have. There is also whoever completes the most contracts. When you complete contracts, we'll go face down. Whoever completes the most gets 7 additional points, and that can be friendly ties or not. Anyway, after all that, after you add up all the end game scoring and do any conversions possible, turning $10 into a point, turning 2 resources into a point if you're in Beijing, whoever has the most points is going to be the winner. So that's how you play Marco Polo. Now let me go into the Sallen Coefficient. Let me first explain a little bit about what the Sallen Coefficient is. Then I'll go into what the Sallen Coefficient is for the Voyages of Marco Polo. I'll defend why that is the rating I've given the game in terms of its Sallen Coefficient. I'm then going to give you guys several different points of pros and cons, like I said, defending. And then I'm going to talk about a critical comparison to other games. Somewhere in there, I might give you my own personal opinion, which is heavily influenced by the Sallen Coefficient for the game, but not identical. There are factors that I look for that I do not consider necessarily contributing to the depth and the amount of decisions per minute, if you will. So let me first tell you about the Sallen Coefficient for anybody who is unfamiliar with what I am trying to do here with this video review series. It strives to balance the amount of decisions and the depth of those decisions with the amount of overhead there is in the game, as well as the amount of time it's going to take for you to learn and play. For simplicity, I give a Sallen coefficient on a scale of 1 to 10. A 10 is a perfect game. A 1 is not a perfect game, but there is actually a 0. And a 0 is basically, to give you an idea, a 0 is no decisions. You just do what the game tells you to do. There's really not much of a game there. It's only about chance. Think like LCR. That's a game that's all about that. You're not making any decisions. The game of life would be an example of a 1. The decision is very illusory. It doesn't matter that much. Most of what you are doing is essentially an exercise in moving pieces around a board. An example of a game that's rated a 5 or a 6 would be something that indicates there's decisions and depth, but that the game struggles either because it's overly complex for how deep it is, or because it takes too much time and leaves players with lots of downtime. Or maybe there's some sort of an element that's betraying the game's depth in terms of in-game randomness that gets revealed. So something is very key in disrupting what the core goal and depth of the game is. There is something that is an issue in a rating of a 6. There might even be multiple ones, but it is something that keeps me from really being able to recommend it. Anything at a level of a 7, 8, or 9 and the illusory 10 would be something that I heartily recommend on the Sallen coefficient scale. To give you an idea, a 10, a perfect score, would be keeping the player constantly engaged in strategic and tactical decisions throughout, despite being extremely quick and intuitive to learn and play. So it's something that I've not given yet. I don't even know of a game that I would point at as a 10, but there is definitely some games that come very close to that so far. And let me tell you now what I think about Marco Polo and where it sits on the Sallen coefficient. It receives a score of an 8 out of 10. An 8 out of 10 indicates that there are minor issues in the game that are disrupting the strategic depth, but that overall, the core of the game is incredibly solid, and very much so, the decisions that you are making outweigh the depth of those decisions, the gravity of those decisions outweigh any sort of issues that are a part of it. So let me tell you about what positives I've come up with the Voyages of Marco Polo. First of all, we're going to talk about the dice placement system. Next, how it's such a difficult economic journey, and the interactivity between players, as well as the various player powers that are a part of the game. So first of all, let's talk about the dice placement. At the start of the game, as I mentioned in my walkthrough, there aren't a ton of options. Really, those are going to develop more as you gain access to these places out on the board. So it is important that the fact that your dice, when you're making a group, you're able to make what I said, like you're able to make a group. It's not just I place one die on my turn to take an action. It's I can place 1, 2, or 3. And so there really can be some pretty big moves in the game, and there's not that many actions as a result of the fact that some actions take several dice to do. Now you could sit there and use single spot actions and get all the black dice, and you could take lots of actions, but generally you're going to have to decide, you know, what's worth me doing. And I would say almost every single round you need to move. Movement is just key to the game because it sets up all the things you can have access to in the future, as well as it sets up everything you're going to get for income. So anyway, I'm going to talk more about the movement, but let me still focus on the actual dice placement itself. A 1 is still useful. You're not just messed over because you didn't roll high enough. Yes, higher numbers mean more activation, but there's one spot there that the number doesn't matter at all. So you can use whatever number you want. And on top of that, you've got your 1s being great for getting you economy. If the spot is blocked that gives you money, you're able to get an extra $1 by placing a 1. So a 1 is not always the worst thing you can have, especially if you're looking to move. If you want to move, you need a 1, because if you have any higher than a 1 and you're looking to move after other players have moved, you are not going to be spending your money efficiently. If I'm moving with a 6 and another player's moved before me, that's $6 extra I have to pay just because another player went to my spot. That is difficult. However, as I mentioned, being the last person to move gets you first player in the next round, which is really important, which means almost every time I move in this game, I am trying specifically to be last. I'm trying to be the last person to go. Thus, depending on how far I'm moving, I want exactly the amount of spaces I need to move and no more, because otherwise I'm overpaying. This dice placement system and the way that it grows, the way that there's spots that do block permanently, but that you're gaining access to them together with other things that you're picking up on the way, very much a robust system, and maybe one of the most robust dice systems there is. Players are able to make decisions about what they want access to at the start of the game. Different actions cost different amounts. There's one spot that works quite different and sort of helps balance out the fact that higher numbers are generally better. But that's basically the tension in this game comes from not necessarily knowing what other players are going to do. And once you get towards the end of the round, though, if you're playing with experienced players or you're playing with people that are making logical decisions, you'll be able to look at what they're doing and really make an informed decision about where you can go and not be contested. So very much so an interesting form of dice placement. I like how every player gets one action on their turn, but the amount of dice they spend is dependent on what action they've chosen. So that dice placement system, very, very cool. Let's now talk about how it's a very difficult journey. I like games with a tight economy. Marco Polo, you're able to get all kinds of resources and all kinds of money and camels, but you're going to need to spend every single one of them efficiently. And almost every turn, I feel like I'm making decisions that are $1 or $2 away from me and from me succeeding and me not being able to even move and progress and keep moving forward with my game. It is a very interesting and tight economy. And no, if you are a new player, your first game, you can focus on whatever you want to do, but most people are going to look at it and be like, oh, these destination things, this is something, a goal for me to set. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy to move, and it's especially not easy if you're directly just trying to get points by going to spots. If you are being clear that you're going to a spot to get an income that also sets you up to be able to get to another spot, which is one of your destinations, and then it gives you a free movement, which gets you closer to another destination, that's what needs to be going into your head. Because the things that are out on the board, these being the first person to get to a certain spot, these really make you want to race to spots for those people against other players. But very frequently, you're going to be needing to take actions to get the stuff that you need to go, unless you want to blow all your dice to get $3 a die, which you can do that as much as you want. So, I mean, you're constantly faced with these difficult decisions. The camels in the game can be used to get black dice. And like I said, black dice are usually really good because you're talking about more actions. But what if you're out of camels and you have to travel through the mountains? What if you're out of camels and you need to be able to get a new contract? Or you want to be able to fulfill a contract so you can get new ones, because you're only able to hold 2 contracts at a time. I didn't say that during my walkthrough or whatever. You're not going to be able to play the whole game just for my walkthrough. But you're only able to have so many contracts, and sometimes you need to be able to decide what is the best thing to do with the game's economy. Now, getting to spots that give you income is just key to this game, and that's going to help you by giving you stuff every single round. The points things are great, but they're great in the late game. In the early game, you're going to be wanting so much money, so much camels. You're going to be wanting to do these amazing things and travel all over the place, but new players are so frequently looking at their cards and just thinking, how do I get there? Yeah, it's not about the destination. It's about the journey. Yes, the destination gets you points, but the journey is what you need to be planning for, and it's a long and difficult one. Well, it's not long. The game isn't that long, but it feels long when you're moving like 1 or 2 spots a turn, and that's all you can afford to do. It really forces me to make difficult decisions. It crunches in my brain, and that's what I love about it. Money is necessary to be able to go to block spots, and they got these really pretty money coin tokens that are like the sort of shaped things that Tom Vassell went all crazy about in Cyclades. Yeah, they did several different types of shaped things in this game, even though they didn't really include enough. I feel like I'm always having to make change, and there's barely enough for every single player. And just other comments about the production. It's incredibly competent. I love the production. The art is beautiful. Dennis Lohausen, excellent art. One other small gripe. Know that everything that I'm not griping about is basically perfect. So take that with what you will. But this is, and you're far away, which is kind of intentional here. Well, not you kind of have to be, but unintentionally, you can see this is 3 camels because it's bigger than this, which is 1 camel. which barely looks any different, especially when you're reaching across the table or trying to look at how much stuff a player has. So they did this thing, and it's continued in some of the later games by these designers where the larger goods represent more, but they're hardly any larger than the other ones. So kind of difficult to see there, and they are the same shape. So anyway, just a small gripe. Aside from that, I mean, just beautiful artwork, very competent, incredibly competent. I'm glad that this is all I have to say about the artwork. In a game like this, I shouldn't be having to say much at all because it's just competent and it melts away and it becomes just the game. All right, so I've talked a little bit about the dice placement. I've talked about how it's a difficult journey and how the economy is very tight. Now let's talk about interactivity. I don't have a ton to say about this because it very much is the I'll take that euro. Well, where it's not like I'm hurting you, it's that I'm taking what you needed before you could get there. There's especially races to get in spots like Beijing for the most points, to be the first person to take any income that you get from specific places that you're there for the first time. The bonus for being in a spot the first time is really great and something you should really seek to get so that you can use those resources to continue moving, continue completing contracts and getting points. Basically, though, there is one specific way in which I think it's just a tad more, and that is that the fact that these spots only have one place to go, meaning you can't go to a blocked city action. You can go to a blocked other action here, but very frequently the first person to take contracts is going to get the best contracts and going to be the only one who's able to take contracts and get income at the same time. The first person to take camels doesn't have to pay. I mean, money in this game is so tight that being the first person is just really huge, but the fact that you can go to places and you're going to need to go to places that are blocked really makes you have to make decisions, and that's going to depend a lot on the interaction between other players. I also really like how the first player of the next round is determined by whoever traveled last in the round before. However, I'd like to see a little bit of variable player turn order, just because sometimes if I travel last, my player to my left in a 4-player game is getting a benefit without having to do anything, something that I'm not generally a huge fan of. Very minor complaint, though. I very rarely ever feel like there is a tough thing to be able to say, like, oh, you're going to take that, and that's a load of crap. Now, I don't think I've ever really thought that. It just is conceptually something that I think they could do. So if you picture like Agricola and the way that in a game of Agricola, generally I'm sitting there and I'm mathing out what actions other players are going to be taking. Oh my goodness, it's like my bald head is causing oh no, I'm the shadow. Okay, I get it. Okay. It's like, what's the glare from the board coming from? Anyway, in Agricola, I'm thinking that player's going to take that. That player's going to take that. That player's going to take that. Then it's my turn. That means I'm going to be available to take this. And I'm doing that like rounds in advance. Here in Marco Polo, it happens to a certain extent, but it just determines like how much money am I going to need to do that, because most actions, especially in a 4-player game, are going to be taken by more than one person. So the interactivity here just has a little tad more of to elevate it beyond just like the I'll take that spot first. There's more aspects here going on than just that. There's a nice little race to be the first person to do things and a race to get the most points in Beijing. The last part here, not my last thing, I've got compensation and dice mitigation, then I'll talk about player powers. Compensation in this game is the 15 rule, the one where if you roll and you have less than 15, you get to take money or camels to make up for that. So I've joked with my friends that the best roll in this game is a Yahtzee of 1s, because you get 10 camels. That's the difference between 15 and 5, and then you can just spend a camel on every single die to re-roll it, and now you don't have 5 1s, probably. Anyway, the way that you're able to choose between money and camels, very difficult decisions. Most of the time I choose camels, but there are some times when, man, I just need that money and I've got way more camels than I'll be able to use, especially if other players, I can see that they've got contracts that I give them black dice that I can't get access to. Anyway, the thing about the compensation is that it gives you a balancing aspect for when you roll low. Yes, you're going to have to not only balance how much money you're going to spend when you put a big die on a spot, because that's how much you're going to be paying. Whatever, if I put a 6 on a spot that's blocked, I have to pay $6. So I need money. That's one balancing aspect. The other one is that if I roll low, I at least get something to work with. The game understands that those low rolls can be devastating. If you have no camels and you roll 5 1s, you have no way of getting many camels. So anyway, they've really considered how to make sure that you are never the randomness of the dice roll at the start of every round is not so much a noose hanging around your neck as it is in other dice games. Here, it's more like a rope bridge that you're using to tether yourself between your plan at the beginning of the game and your plan for the middle of the game and be able to sort of like shimmy across it that way. I very much do like the way that the dice and the mitigation system works that way. I spoke about mitigation. You can spend camels, one of the resources in the game, to either spend 2 to immediately boost up or down a die, or you can spend 1 camel to just take it and re-roll it. So this was reminiscent of a game that I've quite enjoyed, Trois, which is a dice, one of the first, what I would call modern dice games, where they understood that players need to be able to do something to mitigate what they have rolled. So it is very present here in Marco Polo, and one of the reasons I really love the game. I am never strong by what I roll. I'm able to do something with pretty much everything. Next up, let's talk about those player powers. The player powers have very different and somehow mostly balanced abilities. Like, the player power of Kublai Khan is just that he starts in Beijing. That's it. You get the free 10 points for being the first person there, the guaranteed 10 points, I should say, because maybe you would have been first there anyway. But now what really balances about that is that Beijing doesn't have the same remoteness that Venice has. Venice is far away from a lot of things. Venice involves you having to travel to places that cost lots of money before you can get to any of the good income spots. And you end up stuck in the bottom of the map where you need $15 to travel across the ocean to get to India. Here in Beijing, everything's right at your fingertips. You're not having to make those huge investments just to get across a barrier, some sort of a land or water barrier. So they're just, every one of them, one of the guys, you don't have to pay to go on top of spots. So when he rolls high, he's like, yes, because now I can go wherever I want to. I don't have to worry about paying any money. And this guy just basically should always be able to travel last because he can get as much money as he needs and make sure that he's always manipulating turn order. One of these guys is a market, merchant of the market. And he gets things every time players go here. Every time players go to the market, he's going to get some sort of a benefit. In the 2-player game, you get more stuff. In the 3- and 4-player game, you get less just because it's a little bit less, when there's more people taking actions, it would be way overpowered. So there's several different versions of him. All the rest of them are, this guy doesn't have to roll any dice, and somehow it's balanced. He's able to just be like, okay, 6, 6, 6, and yeah, ooh, the number of the beast, whoops. Anyway, he puts down 3 6s or 3 5s here, and he's able to just guarantee get himself this powerful movement that you can get from the gold market. So, I mean, there's somehow very balanced. Does not mean a guaranteed win. None of these really mean a guaranteed win. This guy right here, his thing is that he can move and drop down trading posts without having to stop in an area, meaning that you could move through 3 areas and you get to put down a spot in each one of those and gain any benefits from being the first person or from being an income spot. So hugely impactful there. And then he gets an additional 2 trading posts that you can get more points for if you're able to get him to go off. Very fun, very different way that you play to most of the other ones. This one even gives you like a second person that lets you go in 2 different directions and avoid the really bad movement penalties in certain areas. And since that's not a super strong ability, they give you a little bit of an income of a camel. All these abilities, all these variable player powers change the game, break the game, but they all break the game in a way that feels fair, and each one breaks the way pretty balanced. Except, and now I'm going to transfer on into my cons, there's one dude that is somebody who lets you teleport between oases. But to be able to really use that, you have to be moving at least 3, because you got to move to the oasis, then from that oasis to another oasis, then to somewhere else. Like, yes, in the first turn, if you use your first turn doing it right, you can just get straight to Beijing with only like, a few bucks. So then I guess you're the same as Kublai Khan pretty much. But Kublai Khan gets this like really big jump on the market, and I don't find that the $3 he gets every round is quite as conducive. And I really think that too often players use this ability to their own detriment, because it is really expensive to move 3 or more times. It costs you $12, whereas moving once only costs you $3. So I really think his ability is dangerous, and his compensation of getting $3 every round is unfortunately not quite enough to balance him with the other players. So I find that players generally struggle when playing with him. And that's in general my biggest criticism, and really my main and only criticism for the Voyages of Marco Polo, is that you're going to be making a lot of decisions at setup. and the setup of every game is not necessarily fair or balanced. The game's main way of balancing players' capabilities and choices, the fact that players draft these leaders, these player powers, is that whoever's first player has to choose last, and whoever's last player has to choose first, and they also get the most money. But a lot of times I feel like the choice that you get when it's your turn has already been picked through if you're the first player. Like, there are times when, just by the way that the board sets up, it is great to start in Beijing, or it is great to have two different guys because there's an excellent bonus here that's the random, well, not random, but the bonus that lets you take whatever you want every round. I mean, there's some things like the board can just set up and be really lopsided and reward players that travel to certain spots much worse than, or much more than others. And on top of that, the main criticism of the setup that I have is these destination cards. It just is not enough control. You're not able to really choose. When you've only got 4 that you're choosing from and you're going to be choosing 2, there's many times when it's like, well, I get perfect, and I'm able to just kind of make a little bit of a loop, and I get all 4 of my places done, and I get 23 points because that's just the cards that I drew. There are other times when I draw these cards and I look at them and I'm like, well, the only way I'm going to be able to finish any of these is if I choose 2 that have the same city, which is worth less of a payout. And that's a little bit frustrating. So these cards, you just don't quite have enough control, and you don't even know what they are until you've already chosen your person. And that's so clutch. Like, knowing where you're going to be going and knowing how you're going to be getting money and doing things in the game, it's definitely an issue. Minor, albeit, but definitely an issue. I would like to see something where players can like auction and really decide the value of these destination cards and of the player powers, and have that be tied to your turn order as well. And I think that's definitely some area, some territory that the game could head into. These player powers make me think of Terra Mystica, and in the base Terra Mystica, there wasn't really a system for players being able to determine which of the variable player powers was most overpowered, and that's what Marco Polo is in most need of. I do think that the designers did something for it, but I don't think that giving an extra $1 or letting a player go first because they got to pick last is quite enough in every situation. Maybe it is in some, but I think it needs to be left more up to the players to be able to determine, like, there's so much variability in the game that variability can really be just too much for balance to really hold up. And even though it might be slight, it's something that I think is worth mentioning. So that's why I give it an 8 as opposed to a 9. If it didn't have these sort of balance issues at the setup, I mean, you're making these huge decisions at the beginning of the game that I love, like this huge strategy, because you're deciding where you're going to be going pretty much on turn 1. And then it's just the tactical aspect is based on what the other players are doing. Very, very, very cool. But just I want a little bit more control over the setup. It's too important for me to invest as much as I do in this game, and then get 2 destination cards or 4 destination cards that just don't line up, that require me to make zigzagging weird shapes, and in most cases those are devastating, and you're going to have a hard time recovering from them. I have seen people make it work in situations that I thought were hopeless, but definitely something that I think is something that could be addressed by the actual design. All right. That is my overall opinion of the Voyages of Marco Polo, and how it fits into the Sallen Coefficient, with several different pros and then a little bit of cons there at the end, just dealing with the balance of the setup. My own personal opinion is higher than the Sallen Coefficient, because to me, the variable player powers and the way that so much of the game is something that I'm able to control and impact at the very start, really, really cool. Even though I don't like the way, like, I like it when I get 2 territory cards, 2 destination cards that line up perfectly, but like at the same time, when I don't get those, I think this isn't really fair. And I've gotten to the point now where when I get 2 really good ones that are going to give me like a bunch of points and I can pretty much guarantee get them, I start thinking, this isn't really fair either. Even though randomness favored me, it's not really cool. So it's not really what I play for. I want players' choices and players to be able to really interact with each other and not be hamstrung by decisions the game makes you, that, like sort of illusory decisions that the game gives you at the very beginning. I want you to know, it may sound like I'm coming in hard, but they're very, very minor issues that keep it from being a 9, and I think that they could be cleaned up if the expansion just adds some sort of rules that can maybe make it more for like a heavier gamer, as I would identify as, than having the decisions be a little bit hamstrung by randomness. All right, so next up, let's see here. Oh, I guess also I'm cool with the dice can really impact your rounds and stuff, but I really like this dice manipulation system. I like being able to reroll, even though half the time that I reroll, I feel like I roll a 1 into another 1. What do you know? It actually was a 1. Anyway, but that happens to me all the time, and I get really frustrated. But I'm still very okay with the system because I never feel like I'm just stuck with what I roll in the most cases. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I've got 2 camels to spend. And if I can't get a 4 or higher on any of these rolls, then I'm not going to be able to do the move I want to do. That can be a little bit frustrating if you don't get them. But I mean, I think like I'm starting to think in like variability. So I'm starting to think of probabilities, which is a strategy to the game, even though statistics are one of the greatest lies mankind's ever come up with. Anyway, more on that in some other video. So now that I've given you kind of the Sallen coefficient, my personal opinion, I'm now going to be comparing it to other games. I listed a bunch of games in the comments here, and I'm going to try to stick to that list almost chronologically, with one main exception. I totally forgot to talk about Trois. Yes, the amazing Trois, which is a dice system that to me inspired a lot of the decisions in Marco Polo. Here, there isn't any sort of compensation, but there is a system of rerolls. And actions are actually purchased from other players, which is part of the reason that compensation isn't necessary. Because I could buy your high rolls. And a lot of times, if I roll like a bunch of 6s in the round, I'm like, oh no, everybody else is going to buy my dice, and I'm not going to have anything to do. Same sort of idea with actions, but the actions are much more variable and start up from has a much more... In Marco Polo, you're able to choose your actions by where you go. Here in Trois, the actions are just kind of determined from the very beginning. Yes, you're able to decide which ones you take, but it's not quite where you can see what everything's going to do. And there is an occasional issue with the early actions being much better geared towards later actions that may or may not come up. But I think that adding together the Ladies of Trois expansion with other aspects that can kind of allow you to prepare more for any sort of a setup for the late game definitely help it out. Love Trois. Trois still slightly higher than the Voyages of Marco Polo in my book, but I've not done a Sallen coefficient video, but I don't think the Sallen rating would be, the Sallen coefficient rating of its depth and how much time it takes would be much lower. It's just much tenser game, very much tenser game, because you're able to buy things from other players. If you like tension, go for Trois. If you're more of a Euro gamer, go for Voyages of Marco Polo. I think that they both could maybe share some, there could be some like cross-breeding, and there could be something really amazing. But anyway, that's the first one that I'm going to talk about that's not in the description, but now I'm going to try to stick to what's in my description, starting with the 2 main dice placement games that have been around for quite a while in the hobby, and that is Alien Frontiers and Kingsburg. I'm going to start with Kingsburg because I honestly think Kingsburg is a little bit closer to what Marco Polo is. In Kingsburg, you're going to be rolling dice just the same as you are here in Marco Polo. Everybody rolls at the same time, same way in Kingsburg and Marco Polo. But when you take actions, you're really adding up pips in Kingsburg and then taking a specific action for how many pips you're using. Now, that can result in you kind of being screwed out of an action. If somebody else has already taken the action that has the 1, and you have a 1 to use, you're just not able to do it. It can be a little bit frustrating. Also, because of the nature of this system, if I roll 5, 6, and 6, and I roll like a total of 17, there is just one action that's like amazing. And so if I roll 5, 6, 6, I'm going to take that action. So it involves a lot more lucky actions. Whereas here in Marco Polo, you're making decisions based on what actions you want to be powerful, and there's no system of compensation in Kingsburg. It's just you roll well, you get it. But Kingsburg does have some cool buildings that you can build that are kind of slick and interesting, and its expansion does add quite a bit to it, but it does not hold a candle in my book to Marco Polo, because the core system of it is much more just about like blocking spots based on how much you roll. And that, to me, is a much more limited system than Marco Polo, where these are the actions you can take. You decide how you divvy them up. And it's much more about, like, using a number of dice at a certain strength versus a quantity of pips that may or may not be blocked. So something that I'm going to give Marco Polo is head and shoulders above Kingsburg. So Alien Frontiers, kind of talking about it in the same vein because it's the other dice placement game. In Alien Frontiers, you'll be rolling your dice only at the start of your turn and then taking all these actions, which are kind of similar to Marco Polo in that you're taking actions with either single dice or groups of dice. However, like I said, it's all done on your turn, which means that you could clog up the market for every other player after you because your dice just sit there. I really hate that. I cannot stand the way that turns in Alien Frontiers involve several actions and tons of downtime, and you don't care what it looks like until it's your turn, so there's nothing for you to do. It leaves me down. It leaves me frustrated that certain areas just get clogged up and there's nothing I can do about it, and I really dislike that aspect to it. I think that Alien Frontiers very significantly worse than Kingsburg and doesn't come close to Voyages of Marco Polo. I am not a fan of Alien Frontiers. I think that Marco Polo really found the best of both worlds where you're able to place on actions, but you do it in turn order to increase tension and just keep players engaged. I don't understand why Alien Frontiers has players placing all of their dice at once on a round. It is just, it's beyond my comprehension because I think it does nothing but negatives for the game system. All right, let's talk now about other games from these designers. Lorenzo El Magnifico and Grand Austria Hotel are both games that have come out since the Voyages of Marco Polo. Their earlier game, Tzolk, was, I really hope that I'm remembering that right, but I'm pretty sure this is the guy, these are the design group. The reason I was interested in this in the first place is because it was from Tzolk. So Tzolk doesn't really share much in common with the Voyages of Marco Polo, just that it's a lot about converting goods into points. However, Grand Austria Hotel involves dice drafting, a very different system. And then the Voyages, or Lorenzo El Magnifico, actually involves like a dice placement, but all players have the same value of dice because they are a color of dice that's rolled at the start of the round, and players each have one worker that corresponds to that color of dice. It is a very unique system where all players have to deal with the same rules in Lorenzo El Magnifico, but it adds a lot of like tableau building card aspects, and the goals in the game are very questionably balanced there. I think that in a lot of ways I see a lot of the negative comments that I said about the Marco, like the main negative comment I said about Marco Polo really comes to the forefront in Lorenzo El Magnifico. And just in general, like the choices that you're making tend to be quite a bit more tactical. The board fills up a lot faster, especially in higher player count games. You have an arbitrary limit of 6 of any type of card that you can get. So once you get 6, you just have to do something else because, well, the game told you could only get 6. And I'm not nearly as engaged in that game, though I still do enjoy it and think it's a fine game. My Marco Polo to me is just on a much different level. Like you don't really, in Lorenzo, I don't feel like I'm really making decisions much in advance. Like I'm not considering my end game in my first round, really. I've got these cards that are like end game goals, but it's just like grab so many blue cards. And it's like, okay, well, I'll just grab a blue card every round then. It's not that exciting. It's not like this travel, this journey that you're going on. And especially when some of those are like effects that the earlier you can get them off, they give you a special ability. And if you don't get that to go off until the last round, it's like, why did I just waste my time doing this? Here in Marco Polo, most of your end game like destination things, yes, there is income from places, but your end game destination things here are much more about getting points and not a special ability that weakens and weakens and weakens every round that you're not able to activate it. So that's kind of my criticism of Lorenzo Magnifico compared to Marco Polo. And then Grand Austria Hotel is one of my favorite games to play with my wife. It is a much lighter game and is very limited by the availability of these like guests that come to your hotel. And it just in general, that together with the dice placement system that involves quite a bit more like mitigation and passing. And to me, it's just a much significantly lighter game, but one that really struggles at higher player counts. In Marco Polo, the higher player counts still, the system doesn't start to buckle like it does in Grand Austria Hotel. So if you only play with 2, I'd say either one would be good. If you want a lighter game, go for Grand Austria Hotel. If you want more of a thinky game, go for Marco Polo. The 2-player game is generally how I usually prefer playing it when I play online on the system yukata.de. They have a really great system. And I like the 2-player game just because I'm always taking turns. And maybe also I just like not being blocked all the time. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, still very tense, though. Still very tense and still always considering what other players are doing. So if that gives you an idea, there are other games that, in my opinion, bring about a better comparison. And now I'm going to move on here to talk about a couple of other games that involve using dice, and that is Bora Bora and Castles of Burgundy, both by designer Stefan Feld. In Bora Bora, you are doing like Bora Bora and Grand Austria Hotel are very similar in that they're kind of dice drafting, but in Bora Bora, you're placing your dice on an action to take it, whereas in Grand Austria Hotel, you're removing it, and the amount of dice there matters. But in Bora Bora, it's more about blocking, because it's like all these actions start high, and then whenever somebody goes to a spot with a low die, it just kind of cuts it off for everybody else. And it can be extremely difficult to do anything in that game. Very, very tight game. If you're looking for a super tight game, the goal of the game is very point salady. It doesn't have much progression like Marco Polo does, but the actual gameplay there is incredibly solid. If you're looking for a tactical game that's really in your head, can be extremely, extremely tight and unforgiving, then go for Bora Bora. I personally I think I've given you enough to give you an idea of how Marco Polo compares to that. I'm going to move on now to Castles of Burgundy. Castles of Burgundy has a much more deliberate pacing feel to it, so it doesn't have the highs and lows that both Marco Polo and Bora Bora have. But as far as that goes, it makes it a much more just pleasant experience, and you're still able to do quite a few meaningful things. But I do kind of feel like in Castles of Burgundy, everybody kind of ends up doing mostly everything. It's more like there's a few things that you don't do, and it's really about your timing. Here in Marco Polo, like players will have vastly different just things that they're doing in the game. I mean, yeah, you're all going for points, but like I go on one route, you go on a different route, and that is one thing that these destination cards are very successful at, is getting you to go in different directions because you're being rewarded points for that. So I just wish that the different directions didn't have such obvious advantages one over the other. All right, and now for my last and final comparison. It's not exactly a huge comparison to say. There's very few in particular in common, but I'm going to talk about Ticket to Ride. Ticket to Ride is like the huge gateway game that people start from. And I've never played it, just highly recommend you should play at least one version of Ticket to Ride. Now, the only real comparison between Ticket to Ride and Marco Polo is these destination tickets. In Ticket to Ride, you're able to play anywhere on the board. In Marco Polo, you are a dude moving about, and your movement is very restrictive, difficult. You have to pay to go places. In that way, it kind of reminds me more of Trekking the National Parks. Trekking the National Parks is a game that, in many ways, for me, didn't exactly replace Ticket to Ride, but it was a cool little game that had very similar lineage to Ticket to Ride, but had enough different and actually involved you being a person moving from place to place that I was kind of a fan of and worked more for me thematically. So to compare to Ticket to Ride, or to a certain extent Trekking the National Parks, very different system. Like blocking people does not, like in Ticket to Ride, when you block somebody, you can literally just block somebody out of a city. And they're not going to be able to get that, and now they get negative points. So it can be this really kind of swingy thing, and I think that's what people love about it, is being able to say, ha, 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 I blocked you. And really in Marco Polo, there's very little ha, 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 I blocked you, because people can really start thinking about how to work around that. That's what I love about Marco Polo. It doesn't just like give players the tools to be able to stab each other in the side like Ticket to Ride kind of does. It's more about like, yes, I got there first. It's more of an efficiency game where now I'm going to be a little bit less efficient, but I can still find ways to work around that. And those are the type of decisions I love having to make as the game continues. So those are my main games that I had for comparison. I haven't seen anything in the live chat to suggest any extra games to compare, but I hope that this has been a helpful video for you, the Sallen Coefficient of Voyages of Marco Polo. I'm super excited for the upcoming expansion, which has not been released, or it's basically just been announced as of the recording of this video. But I'm super, super pumped. Maybe I'll do another video later where I talk about the small expansion that they put out after they won like the Deutscher Spielpress, to kind of just a little fan expansion, little kind of nice, add some new and interesting things. But anyway, the game itself without that is very much functional, very great. one of my top games, and I hope I've been able to articulate that. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Sallen Coefficient. One last thank you to, once again, to Game Surplus, my sponsor. They're bringing the world of board games to you. They're really a great online game store, very friendly individuals, and real gamers that know their stuff, small enough to be mom and pop, really know their stuff. Go check them out. games@gamesurplus.com is the email, or just go to gamesurplus.com and check out their newly remade website with a brand new server that holds a large amount of people at once, and they've got some great sales and stuff, and a lower shipping threshold than a lot of the big box ones out there. So than the big ones like cool stuff. So anyway, go check them out at gamesurplus.com. I'm Joe Sallen. I didn't even say this earlier, but I host a board game podcast called The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. I'm also one of the hosts of the Longview podcast. And if you're tuning in right now, in about an hour and a half, or not an hour and a half, about 2.5 hours, 2 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on the date that I'm recording this, which happens to be September 17th, I'm actually going to be participating as host in a review or a Longview episode of the Longview podcast, where we take an in-depth look at games. We're going to be talking about Love Letter and other micro games. So come check that out. If you still don't have anything going on at 2 o'clock, come check out and be a part of that discussion here in the live chat that we'll be popping out and looking at. So anyway, in the future, you should check out more of my videos, and I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm Joe Sallen. This is Sallen Coefficient. Have a great day or great week of gaming, great future of gaming, and enjoy great games like the Voyages of Marco Polo. Bye.